You know what? I went into Gen V genuinely excited. Of the Boys spin-off set in a superhero college sounded like such a good idea on paper. Younger Supes, more brutal experiments, messed up students trying to survive inside Vought's system. It had a lot of potential. And right from the beginning, Marie Moreau was clearly positioned as the center of everything. The story constantly treated her like she was special. She had the tragic backstory, the insanely dangerous blood powers, the emotional trauma, the chosen one energy. Even the marketing around Gen V kept hyping her up as someone important for the future of the Boys universe. There were non-stop theories about how Marie might eventually become one of the few characters capable of actually stopping Homelander. And honestly, it made sense. Her powers are ridiculously overpowered if you really think about it. She can manipulate blood inside the human body. She can explode people from the inside. She can weaponize her own blood. And theoretically, she should have been one of the most dangerous Supes alive. That setup alone made people believe she was eventually going to have some massive payoff in The Boys Season 5. But after everything, Marie Moreau honestly ended up feeling completely useless. And that's what frustrates me the most. After 2 seasons of build-up, trauma, power development, and emotional setup in Gen V, Marie finally crosses over into the main storyline, only to basically become background decoration. She joins Starlight's resistance for a bit, helps with small missions, says a few emotional lines, looks stressed, and then nothing. When the final conflict against Homelander and the remaining members of the Seven finally happens, Marie barely matters. No major confrontation, no huge power moment, no emotional payoff, no "this is why we spent so much time building her up" scene. She's just kinda there. And honestly, that feels insane considering how much potential her powers had, because logically speaking, Marie should have been terrifying to Homelander. Her entire ability revolves around controlling blood. In theory, she should have been one of the few people capable of hurting him internally instead of trying to overpower him physically. That's what made the setup feel so exciting in the first place.
It felt like the Boys universe was slowly introducing a new generation that might eventually surpass the old guard. But instead, the final major conflict still revolves mostly around Butcher, Huey, Frenchie, Kimiko, and the original cast, which is fine, except the show spent so much time telling us Marie was important. That's the problem. The payoff never matched the setup. And honestly, Marie herself also suffers from another issue. Her personality just isn't that memorable. I'm trying not to sound overly harsh here, but compared to other Gen V characters, Marie often feels weirdly flat. Most of the time, she has the exact same emotional expression: sad, confused, slightly angry, repeat. She doesn't really have the dark charisma that makes characters in the Boys universe stand out. She's not chaotic like Sam. She's not emotionally layered like Kate. She's not as naturally compelling as Jordan Lee. Even Emma sometimes feels more human and emotionally engaging than Marie does. That's why it started feeling like the writers wanted Marie to be important more than they actually knew how to make her important. And the result is a protagonist who constantly gets positioned as the emotional core of the story, without ever fully earning that level of importance, which becomes a huge issue once she enters the larger The Boys storyline. Because when crossover time finally arrives, audiences expect payoff, especially in a universe like The Boys, where setup and consequences usually matter a lot. But Marie's story almost feels unfinished, like the writers kept delaying her big moment until eventually there was no room left for it. And honestly, that made Gen V feel less meaningful retroactively. A lot of fans watched that series believing these characters would heavily impact the main story later, but instead, most of them barely changed anything in the bigger picture. That's why Marie now feels like one of the biggest wasted opportunities in the entire franchise. Not because the character had no potential, but because the writing never fully committed to making her matter.
And honestly, I think some other Gen V characters deserved the spotlight way more. Jordan Lee, for example, constantly stole scenes whenever they appeared. Their powers were visually unique, their identity struggles felt emotionally real, and they naturally had more screen presence. Kate also became far more interesting once the show leaned into her darker side. Even Emma had moments where she felt more emotionally relatable than Marie. Meanwhile, Marie often feels like she's reacting to the plot instead of driving it, and that's dangerous for a lead character,
Because in a franchise as loud and chaotic as The Boys, passive protagonists usually get overshadowed fast. At the end of the day, that's why Marie Moreau feels disappointing to me. Not because she's weak, not because her powers are boring, but because the universe kept promising she would become something huge and then never delivered. She was introduced like the future of the franchise, but by the end, she feels more like a forgotten side character trapped inside her own storyline. And honestly, that's probably the worst thing that can happen to a chosen one character. But what do you guys think? Do you agree that Marie ended up being wasted potential? Or do you still think she has a future in the Boys universe? And if you had to choose, which Gen V character do you think deserved more focus than Marie? Comment your thoughts below, and don't forget to like and subscribe for more movie and series discussions like this.